Thank you. Well, Ruby's leaving school at 16, and the old man says, "What are you going to do now you're leaving school?" She said, "Well, I'd like to come and work here with you on the farm." He said, "Well, there's tractors coming in now down at Bewers. Brands of Bewers are importing international tractors. I'll go down there and see what they're like and what they've got." And he comes back with his international junior tractor that you saw in there earlier, and they seem to think that a tractor is for a lady because it had a seat on it. Because and so they got a lady to come and teach her all about this tractor and what to do with it and everything like that. And when I was a boy and you had a binder, you had a grease gun. You had to go around early morning. But even this tractor, I didn't even have them. I think they had cups that you put grease on. And there was this lady came called Muriel Rainsford, and she came from Ashington, and she'd been trained by brands who were importing these tractors to what to do and that like, and she'd been on a big state at Paul's out at Ipswich, and so she came up there to teach Ruby what to do and told her all the things and how to grease it up and everything like that. And even when I was a boy, she told us all the things, how to, when you start up when you start it off the handle, how you have to have your thumb over that way and not that way, otherwise if that backfires, that'll take your thumb off. And all those little quirks and things like that. And she's out there ploughing with it, and he came back with a Cockshut Kid Kangaroo 2-furrow trailer plough made by the Cockshut company down in the West Country somewhere. And Ruby's ploughing this land at night time. She has a hurricane lamp right across the field and back this side, so she can see to go across the field and back, and ploughs the land and get it all up like that. And the old man says, "Will that tractor pull the drum?" And she said, "Yes, I reckon it will." And so he said, "Well, over at the offhand farm over at Fludgers at Hadley," he said, "there's 30 acres of sugar beet seed. And that time of day, if they had a crop that didn't come to much, they used to leave it another year for seed. And this sugar beet," she said, "that wasn't much, that only much bigger than a blinking carrot," she said. And so he decided to leave it for seed, and he said he wanted it thrashed out. So he sent her and Harry Tricker, the foreman, the two of them, normally when you want about 6-7 men on a thrashing team, sent the two of them over there. She said, and this tractor didn't have a proper brake on it for some reason, I don't know why, but anyhow, perhaps they didn't have when they first came out, those tractors. And she said, going uphill with the great weight of this drum on it, she said that was terrible. But anyhow, we managed to get over there, and we thrashed this out, and we took our bicycles, and we drove back. She said, while I was over there, old Harry Tricker, he said, kept ribbing me. He wanted a bottle of my best wine. And she said, "Well, Harry," she said, "if you see that wasp nest over there, if you sit on it for 5 minutes," she said, "you can have a bottle." And she said, "Well, it was all right with the wasps that were coming out. His thick old corduroys would cover them." He said, "But he had a hell of a job with the ones trying to get in." And his missus wasn't very pleased with Ruby over that. She said she could have ruined their wedding or their matrimonial stakes or whatever. Anyhow, old Harry always had a joke and things. And there was another old boy up there at the farm called Chris Smith. And Chris Smith he'd been in the regular army before the 1418 war, and he'd got in with a girl in Boxford, and he was always late going back on parade. And one of his little stories was, that she used to tell us about Chris, was Chris reckoned he went back this time, and he hadn't got a proper excuse. So when he got back there, the CO had him in. He said, "Well, Smith, what is it this time?" He said, "Well, sir," he said, "there I was in my uniform," he said, "in my regimental uniform," he said, "and I was on the platform with the ticket in my hand, ready to get on the train. Well, all of a sudden, a band struck up, 'God Save the King.'" He said, "Well, me being in my uniform," so he said, "I wasn't going to let the regiment down." He said, "I stood there to attention, and when I was standing to attention, the train left the station." The CO said, "Smith," he said, "you're a credit to the regiment. Case dismissed." The other time he said, in the 1418 war, he said, that was up to your backside in water, he said, in the trench. He said, it was terrible. He said, and the soles had gone off my boots. He said, oh, God, it was terrible. He said, and I sat there and I thought, I'm going to get another pair of boots. He said, so I went over the top. He said, I crawled about. He said, and I got a lovely pair of boots off a dead German officer. And I came back. He said, I was sitting on the side there. My mate said, where'd you get them? He said, I went over the top. I said, I got them. He said, I'm having a pair like them. He said, and he was gone over there. God, he said, Christ, I was only gone about 3 minutes. He was gone half an hour. And he came back with a pair of boots. He said, Christ, where you been all this time? He said, I thought you was a goner. He said, oh, he said, I had to shoot 6 Germans. He said, for I got a pair of the right size. Anyhow, that was Chris Smith. And he always had, and then he deserted apparently in the end for this girl there was in Boxford, and it was the local copper's job to catch him. And there was all stories about all the lads were in the pub on the lookout for the copper, and the poor old copper hadn't got any chance at all. And one night he cornered Chris in this cottage, in his girlfriend's cottage. He was sleeping downstairs, and he came in the doorway and he said, I got you this time, Chris boy, I got you this time. And Chris said, what do you mean? He said, you're over there by the doorway and I'm here. He said, how do you mean you've got me? He said, you can't get out now. And with that, Chris jumped straight through the glass window and was gone. And another time, the copper was chasing him up Cox Hill, and Chris is going in front, is running in front, and he came to where they're cutting with the binder. And of course, they wish to cut with the binder round and round in the middle that time of day. So Chris runs, gets in this field where they're cutting, and runs round behind the binder. And the copper comes up there, gets off his bike, runs round behind Chris. And as they go round, Chris runs round, the copper's after him, nearly getting to him. But as Chris gets back to the gateway, of course he sees this bike. And so he hops on the bike and waves him goodbye and said, cheerio. But anyhow, Ruby's riding horses for this man, Partridge, who kept Weatherton Maypole. And she goes over there, and he's got a horse that he can't do anything with. It's nappy, she said, and it lays its ears, and he won't do anything. But she speaks to it, and she always used to speak to these animals and creatures. If she had a dog, she wouldn't pass it without speaking to it, and she used to talk to him, and that's right. And she talked to this horse and got on all right with it. And then she got on its back, and she said, well, there's nothing wrong with that. She said, how much money do you want for it? And he said, £24. And that was called Swanee. And Swanee, they was fast, and she'd got an S mark, discharge mark, come out of the services, a surplus, and they decide to enter Swanee in the local point-to-point. And they get the best rider about, which was Ben Boreham, and he comes down there, and Ruby says, don't touch it, whatever you do with the whip. And but anyhow, he wouldn't ride without a whip, and he goes round there with his whip, and as he's going into one of the jumps, he just touches her and she stops. And this happened 2 years running, and she comes in second. But anyhow, she had a story about Ben Boreham. Ben Boreham, he was a bit of a lad as well, and he reckoned that a certain farmer in their area used to sleep with his housekeeper. So he took bets at the pub, and they all crept round to his house one night, and they all got outside the window, and they shouted, fire! And 2 heads came out the same window pane. He said, there you are. He said, there you are, it proves my point. Anyhow, Ruby's getting on with the hunt, and people out there, and the huntsman at that time was a man called Ernie Nunn. And Ernie Nunn was a great character, and he had great skill with hounds, and he was one of the only huntsman, she ever said, who could call off hounds when in full cry. And she walked, you walk a foxhound puppy, and she had 2 foxhound puppies for Ernie. One was called General, one was called Rummager. And Rummager, they thought, would win the Essex and Suffolk puppy trials. But unfortunately, he went back, when he went back to the stables, he got to the kennels, he got distemper, and Ruby said that's the last one she was going to have, because she wasn't going to get her greyhounds. She was very fond of her greyhounds, and she wasn't going to let them get distemper. But anyhow, she thought a lot of Ernie Nunn, and he was a legend in his own right. And Andrew will just tell you about him.
From stories I've been told, there was once a huntsman bold, whose skill with horn and music of his voice brought respect from hunt and hound, not many since have found, and is still talked about where hunting folk rejoice. Now Ernie Nunn loved his hounds with a love that knew no bounds. He'd search all night to bring a lost pup home. For the joy of his cry, come raise your glasses high, as the voice of Ernie Nunn goes on and on. When he blew the mournful horn, you knew a covered blank was drawn, or you might hear the joyous sound of gone away. And you knew when hounds had found, 'cause his voice would quickly sound, forward on and whick to old playmate. Wishbone and Cameron, playboy and old treason, all within his pack would hunt as one. For the joy of his cry, come raise your glasses high, as the voice of Ernie Nunn goes on and on. When a mooted horn he blew, everybody knew 'twas to keep a hound's head down upon the scent. Yet through thicket, bush and thorn, you could mark his merry horn, to follow whichever way he went. With pitch and tone and knack, no whip he needed crack, to bring a hare-chasing puppy off a run. For the joy of his cry, come raise your glasses high, as the voice of Ernie Nunn goes on and on. So Ernie Nunn had skill, few others have and will. He could call off hounds when in full cry, and they loved his every word, and did just what they heard. For him they would run till they would die. And when evening shadows fall, and fireside beckons all, where stories of sporting deed are sung, for the joy of his cry, come raise your glasses high, as the voice of Ernie Nunn goes on and on. Though Ernie Nunn has gone, his music carries on, and if I dwell upon the Polstead road, with scent upon the ground, in me heart I hear the sound, from the Nustards down to King Harry's Grove, as he rattles foxes round, Justice Wood and Stunny down, there'll be voice and horn and hounds giving tongue. For the joy of his cry, come raise your glasses high, as the voice of Ernie Nunn goes on and on. For the joy of his cry, come raise your glasses high, as the voice of Ernie Nunn goes on and on.
Well, times are getting really hard, and Ruby said that they used to reckon that farming paid when a sack of wheat would pay for a man's weekly wage. And a man was getting 6pence an hour, and that was 23 shillings a week, and a sack of wheat was 23 shillings. And that got down to £1 and 18 shillings. They got down to 15 shillings, and it bottomed out at 8 and 6pence a sack, and they were losing money hand over fist. And you could walk from Clacton to Colchester, from Clacton to Cambridge rather, on land that nobody would take, and because they don't want to lose money. And you could rent any farm you liked for 3 years rent free. And it was driving honest to goodness farmers shanny. And they were being thrown out under, there was no bottom line then, there was no handout from the state, you were thrown out. Bankrupt, the workhouse for you. And she said that if you hadn't got anything, you were lucky because you hadn't got to worry about it, because sooner or later you'd lose it. And the biggest thing that she told us about how nobody had any money. And she said that it never seems to rain but what it pours. And at that time they had a mare called Smart, a Suffolk mare, who could move the drum, and they needed her. She used to rear up to get the drum moving, the thrashing drum moving, and they needed her, and the hunt went past, and these heavy horses used to get excited when the hunt was about, and she got out, and they found her, and she was in a ravine called the Creech, and so they didn't find her the next day, and she couldn't stand, and so they came back, and they took one of the big barn doors off the hinges, and they took it down, and they managed to winch her on there, and they dragged it back into the barn. And on these old Suffolk barns, as you probably know, there's 4 gable ends. There's 2 long ones where they used to store the corn, and there's one short ones at the front and the back where the old men used to thrash with a flail in there. And so there's 4 big posts, and they got pulleys, and they got canvas underneath her, and they lifted her up so the weight was off her feet, and she stood there, and she got better. And about this same time, she had a little foal called Tishy that she had reared on a bottle because its mother got mastitis, and it was now 4, and it was obviously must have been broken then. Well, they had a lot of trust in it. But the old man goes down to see it one night, and it's making a funny noise, and he says, "What's the matter, my dear?" And as he stroked it, he put his hand in a great place. And what had happened was the stupid cowman had turned the bull in with the cows, and the horse was in there, and the bull had gored it. And Ruby said they got her up and got her in a stable with a half door that was fairly near the back door, so where she could see her every day, she said, and that was where she died, with her head over there, whinnying for me, and that's where she died. Some of these stories, when we were children, used to make us cry when we were kids. And she said they had a Suffolk colt that they were going to have castrated, and the man who normally did it on the farm didn't come back from the 1418 war, so they went down to the vets and got a vet to come out to see about it, and he was a young vet that had come from the war, and the old man saw him tying his leg up, and when they tied the leg up, throw them over, and he said, "I don't like that being done." He said, "I've seen horses break their legs like that." And this vet said, "I'm the professional, I'll do it my way." And so he left him and turned to go inside the house, but he hadn't got inside the house hardly at all before there was a bang on the door, and said, "Have you got a gun, governor? I've just broken his leg." And she showed us this pear tree where this colt had stood, and it did used to bring a lump to our throat. But all the best horses had been sold, and they had a 3/4 bred Shire that she had in the ploughing traces that she took out occasionally if there was a meet nearby to have a day's hunting on. She could ride this 3/4 bred Shire, and on this old farm there was a mounting block. That is a mounting block somewhere else, but there was a mounting block where they go up 3 steps to get on your horse, otherwise you had to have a leg up, and that was always known as the Josen. And I wondered why that was called that, and I only found out recently that actually comes from jousting, from a jousting block, so I suppose it must be an old Norman word that's been handed down to us. And if you went out for a day on your horse, you're stepping up to the Josen. So Andrew will tell you about it. Thank you.
I'm stepping up to the Josen, and me head's high in the air. Of a fresh white stock and a long tom crop, for nobody do I care. Yesterday we walked the furrow, my 3/4 Shire and I. Today we ride with gentry folk to hear the huntsman cry. Many mile I've followed after, today astride I ride. And I'm stepping up to the Josen with a heart that's full of pride. Yes, I'm stepping up to the Josen with a heart that's full of pride. I'm stepping up to the Josen, 'cause farming ain't that grand. There's a market slump because they dump wheat from foreign lands. All of our fine horses have been sold to pay the bank. Money we've got scarce enough to buy a penny stamp. Friends around are bankrupt, still somehow we stand. And I'm stepping up to the Josen, but there's hard times on the land. Yes, I'm stepping up to the Josen, but there's hard times on the land. I'm stepping up to the Josen, I've been out in the damp, ploughing late with a furrow straight to the light of a hurricane lamp. Must plough this land for Christmas, do there'll be no tilth in spring. I whistle as I guide me horses, oft times I do sing. And now our work is forward, and we're taking this day off. And I'm stepping up to the Joseph in me, melting hunting cloth. Yes, I'm stepping up to the Joseph in me, melting hunting cloth. I'm stepping up to the Joseph in me melting hunting coat. The outside's in, the inside's out, mother's turned it all about. Unpicked the seams, restitched them, now it looks like it's brand new. I've a pocket for me little flask and one for a doorstop too. Cobwebs in the morning, dag, make such a pretty sight. Now I'm stepping up to the Joseph and you won't see me till night. Yes, I'm stepping up to the Joseph and you won't see me till night. I'm stepping down from the Joseph, I've had me day of sport. Fed the mare all week and spare, she is a goodly sort. I've had my boiled batter, up the tortoise range stood. Legs like lead, that's up to bed, we climb them stairs of wood. And when these hard times are over, sack of wheat again all one man pay. I'll be stepping up to the Joseph and it's then you'll hear me say, I'll be stepping up to the Joseph and it's then you'll hear me say, I'm stepping up to the Joseph and me head's high in the air. I've a fresh white stock and a long tom crop, for nobody do I care. Yesterday we walked the furrow, my 3/4 shire and I. Today we ride with gentry foot to hear the huntsman cry. Many miles I've followed after, but now astride I ride. And I'm stepping up to the Joseph with a heart that's full of pride. Yes, I'm stepping up to the Joseph with a heart that's full of pride.
Well, times are very hard, and Ruby said that's no good thinking that if you thrash a stack out that you're going to get the money for it. He said because the seed merchant that you're in hock to, he'd know about it, and he'd be sending his wagon up into the yard to take the corn. So there was no money. There was no money coming in at all. And so she decides to go and learn hairdressing. And she answers a course in London, and she hasn't got enough money, but she decides to go. And her father takes her to the station, and he doesn't speak to her. And next day he writes to her and said he wishes, she hopes she dies in it for leaving him. But anyhow, she gets up there and gets on pretty well. And after a week, they're putting her in the salon, doing certain things and that like. And this is up in Sloane Street, Knightsbridge, right in the heart of London. And people are coming in there and saying, where's that young farmer's daughter that I want to talk to her. I want her to cut my hair because I can talk to her about horses. And she's getting on really well. And then her father writes and says how pleased he is to hear she's getting on so well. But and then the next thing is she's been up there about 6 weeks and finished this course. And he sends telegrams saying, come home, I start harvest tomorrow, and things like that. And so she goes home again, and he puts her in charge of paying the men, which she normally did. And the first week there isn't enough money to go round, so she doesn't have any. So the next week, when she takes enough for the previous week, he said, why have you taken that money? And she said, well, that's the previous week's money. He said, I'm surprised at you taking that money, he said, when you know how hard up I am. And he throws his dinner at her, and it goes straight through the window. And there's a photograph here in a minute. You'll see a few panes missing in one of the windows, and it's still missing if you go up the road between them. If you go past this farm, up the road from Boxford to Kersey, there's a dog leg, and you look straight in this window, and that's always been like that all my life. But anyhow, and so she said, well, that's the last penny I'll ask you for. And she then gets another job, and she goes away, and she's in charge of a salon in Guildford, and she's getting £5 a week now, and he's been paying her £1 And he writes and says, after she'd been up there 2 or 3 weeks, that if she doesn't come home, he's going to turn her mother out. And which she duly does. She goes over to the Auntie Nellie Doe over at Easthorpe, and so Ruby has to come home. She wasn't going to have her mother ill-treated. And she comes home and she borrows a motorbike in Boxford to go and get her mother, and then they walk back home. And she said she walked down the road into that house with her mother, hand in hand, and he came out to greet them as if everything in the garden was lovely. But she said, I ain't going to stay here. She said, there's a little house to rent down in Boxford of 18 pence a week. I'm going to take that. And he'd already turned out Claude, which was Ruby's brother, eldest brother, and he turned him out when he was 17. And so she took him in down there, and she goes down there. And she said that if she went out 5 nights, she had a little putt-putt bike, what she called a putt-putt bike. I don't know what that was, a Lee Enfield or something. She could go out 5 nights, and if she went out 5 nights a week, she could earn £1. And with that £1, she gave her mother 10 shillings to keep house on because she didn't have any money at all. And just as likely, the old man would send up, because he wanted money. He'd now put the farm down to grass and gone into cows, and they used to hand milk 46 cows. And she said, I'll come up for you and I'll do your ploughing and I'll help with the harvest. She said, but I'm not going to live there, and which she did. But anyhow, her younger sister Edna has gone away and learned, they let her go away and learn hairdressing. And Ruby said there's a good opening down in Hadley, and she starts a little place down there in Hadley. And she's getting on, and she marries Harold Bloomfield, who is the baker's son, and he's an apprentice at Ransom's in Ipswich. And they're playing tennis down there, and she says to Ruby, why didn't you come down and play tennis? We play on such and such a night. And Ruby didn't want to go down there with her smart, highfalutin friends. And then she said, well, there's a young man down here that you ought to meet, and she still didn't go. But in the end, she did go down there, determined to shock this fellow. But she didn't shock him because he'd been in the Navy. And that night, as she cycled up Gallows Hill out of Hadley home, he came up there with her. And it wasn't long after that they decided to get married. So she sells her horse Nabs to the old man for £25. And he says he hasn't got any money to pay, and he gives her an IOU saying that, and the light on the horizon was the wheat quota. The government were bringing in a wheat quota, and he says he'll pay her when the wheat quota comes. And but he never ever did pay. And so she leaves him with Nabs, and because she's moving around with Arthur, who is then a travelling salesman, relief manager for the electrical company. And but she's always spending every minute she can back at Boxford, back at her home, and with the children we were christened there. She had the local midwife, Auntie Griggs, came and delivered children everywhere, and my sister. When my sister was born, she was born, apparently when Ruby was carrying Audrey, there was a cat run across the road, and the car had to stop, and she put her hands to her face like that, and Audrey was born with cat's fur on her face. But old Granny Griggs said, just put a little bit of spittle on it, dear, night and morning, that'll go away. And that did. But anyhow, and she's back up there and seeing old Lassie Pattle, who was a wise old man, and she always keeps in touch with him. And he we used to take him a Christmas pudding every Christmas morning, old Lassie Pattle, and he always had predictions about things, and people used to go and see him for miles because he had cures for horses and anything like that. And she said when they had foot and mouth disease in about 1926, they went to see Lassie, and he said, just treat him with Stockholm tar and salt. He said, and that'll go away. He said, and that did go away. And as I say, people used to go and see him. But his big thing was nature, and he was always on about nature. And he believed, he said that the soil as the body of Christ. But as I say, he was always on about nature, and Andrew will tell you about him.
Early one morning, old Granny, she stood at the big farmhouse table, a-mixing some pud. She said, have a stir, boy, and wish if you do, keep it a secret, then that'll come true. Then it's into the cupboard, 6 months for to leave, till puddings come down again on Christmas Eve. There's some for the family, for you if you're good, and one for old lassie who lives by the wood. 'Cause each Christmas morning to his home by the wood, with pudding we'd tramp for that man wise and good. And the thing that he'd tell me, time's coming I know, when seagulls no longer will follow the plough. Then she told me of Lassie, ancient and old, a great visionary with tales to unfold, who'd tell of the future and deeds to be done. He say that's by nature that all life has come. He lived like a hermit and only done good for all kinds of creatures, his friends by the wood. So if you go over, boy, on Christmas Day, then just you listen to what Lassie say. 'Cause each Christmas morning to his home by the wood, with pudding we'd tramp for that man wise and good. And the thing that he'd tell me, time's coming I know, when seagulls no longer will follow the plough. We'd sit round his fireside and time would go fast, with old country sayings great knowledge he'd pass. He'd foretell the weather with a look at the sky, cows or the moon or how swallows do fly. He say ice in November, if that bear a duck, the rest of the winter'll be slush and muck. Keep an eye out for nature, important her ways, and St. Luke's little summer brings 20 fine days. 'Cause each Christmas morning to his home by the wood, with pudding we'd tramp for that man wise and good. And the thing that he'd tell me, time's coming I know, when seagulls no longer will follow the plough. He'd tell about horses, their ways to a fault, the frogs bun the melt, how an entire to hold, plough land by St. Stephen's for tilth in the spring, respect for nature good husbandry bring, set onions by Stoke Fair, by Edmund our king, set beans and set barley when slow blooms agin. And nuts by St. David's, he said with a nod, whosoever sets land must believe in God. 'Cause each Christmas morning to his home by the wood, with pudding we'd tramp for that man wise and good. And the thing that he'd tell me, time's coming I know, when seagulls no longer will follow the plough. Well, the last time I saw him, he looked very sad. He said change is coming to them that are bad. Big business from nature for the sake of man's greed will cause folks to take much more than they need. We'll be pawns to accountants, politicians and banks, genetic conglomerates who never give thanks. The destruction of nature by chemical firms will leave us with fields where there aren't even worms. Now each Christmas morning in the fields that are left, I stand by that wood in nature bereft. And Lassie, it's coming home now, when seagulls no longer can follow the plough.
Well, Martha dies at St Neots in 1943 and had been moved around and he'd been ill for some years. He'd been knocked off his motorbike by a cow that ran across the road about 8 years before, and they said he'd been injured internally. And that left Ruby with 2 young children, and people said that wondered how she was going to survive, but survival was written in her name. And the first thing she did was sold some of her expensive furniture and bought cheaper stuff in the market, and then she started dabbling in furniture and selling that. And she was under notice to quit in rented accommodation, but she rented a big house up the road that had been requisitioned from the army and that was filthy, and they had to want a lot of work doing to it. And she took that over and scrubbed the floors and got it round and got 1 room let and then a flat let, and then managed to get it all let in eight flats. And by now she was getting on her feet. And I remember about this time, she said at St Neots she wanted to get away from there, but she said that one stop up the train line at Peterborough is the best hunter judging in England. And she bundled us young kids on the train and we went up there, and her pleasure was in looking at all the horses as they went round and telling you what was going to be first, second, third, fourth or fifth. And because she knew whether that was Roman nosed, lop-eared, long in the neck, long in the back, goose rumped, hobdayed, side bone, ring bone, whatever it was, she knew about it. And there was a woman went round there showing a horse, and the judge beckoned her into the middle and she didn't see it. Oh, Ruby said, God, she'd never ever ride a horse of mine if I had one. She said, when you go round there, you keep your hands down and you keep one eye on the judge at all times, and you don't wait for him to look at you more than twice, and you take your horse, take your horse in there automatically. And if you think it's good enough, you don't put it down the bottom, you put it up the top. And that is the way you win in those sort of places. So that was still her pleasure. And she managed to get enough money to put down on a house, and she wanted to get nearer home. And Newmarket was where she wanted to get to. I suppose it was near the horses and that like. And she put some money down the house there and did the same with that and got it let in flats, and she got on her feet there. And I think she always secretly harboured a wish that she'd love to own a horse that would win a race at Newmarket. Meantime, her younger brother Tickles had got interested in horses, and he was hunting with the Essex and Suffolk, and one of his old mates had won the members' race with a horse that nobody knew about where it had come from. And they all said that it had come out of a stable in Newmarket. So he says to Ruby, keep your eyes peeled if there's an old horse, an old nag about there that where they haven't been paid for, or something like that, and they're willing to let go cheap. And so she had a word with a little old jockey boy who lived next door, Doug Fisher, and he used to go and ride schooling for a trainer down the Fordham Road, Hughie Sidebottom. And he said, yeah, he's got a grey horse up there. He said, the word is that he hasn't been paid for a long while. And Ruby said, well, how much is he owed on that? And he said, I'll find out. And they reckoned he was owed about 100 quid training fee, and he could let it go. So Ruby phoned him up and said, hello, Mr. Sidebottom, have you got any horses up there that you might want to sell or anything like that? He said, yes. He said, I've got 1 or 2. He said, perhaps one would be suitable for a point-to-point. He said, come on down Sunday morning. Anyhow, so Tickles came over and he told me, he said, these old horse dealers cool. He said, they're artful as a wagon load of monkeys if you go up there. He said, you've got to be ahead of them. You've got to be ahead of them. He said, and you can't accuse them of cheating. He said, you've got to play them at their own game. But anyhow, we went up there and we see this horse, and they run him along the line, that right, and turn him sharp, so they see how if his back is any good, so he turned his feet over and that sort of thing, and came round, and Tickles got on his back and then said, well, what's the damage on this horse? And Hughie Sidebottom said, well, he said, I have been asking £400. And Tickles said, oh, he said, £80, enough money, he said, for a point-to-point horse. He said, oh dear, he said, that's no good. He said, come inside for a drink. So about an hour and a bottle of scotch later, they're still talking about this thing, and Hughie Sidebottom says, he said, why don't we toss? He said, 150 or £100. So Tickles said, yes. He said, yeah, all right then. So anyhow, Hughie Sidebottom puts his hand in his pocket to bring out a coin, and he didn't bring out one coin. Tickle saw it's going to bring out a coin. He brings out a fistful of coins. He got as many as he can get in his hand. And he throws them up in the air. He says, "Call." Tickle said, "What, call?" He said, and these coins came down and they hit the ground and they ran everywhere, all over this damn room. And about the first 7 coins in the middle, as luck would have it, were all heads. He said, so Tickles was winning there, and Huey's sidebottom then disappeared almost underneath the sideboard. He said, 5 tails. So Tickles said, boy, he said, get round behind the settee. He said, get all the heads. He said, get all the heads. So anyhow, went round collecting all these coins up, and at the end of the day, Tickles had won this bet, and then he about 16 heads to about 15 of Huey's sidebottoms, and they took this horse over. But he reckoned he'd had a dream, my Uncle Tickles, and he always reckons his dreams came true. But I never did believe that one when he reckoned he'd had a night out with Princess Margaret. I never ever did believe that. But he reckons his dreams always come true, and he'd had a dream how he'd bought this lop-eared grey horse, and then he'd had another dream about all the money that they are going to win on it. And Andrew will tell you about it.
My uncle rose at 6 one day, go and put your best suit on, did say. We're going down Newmarket Way, we're going to buy a racehorse. He'd dreamt that night a dappled grey, with loppy ears who'd stay all day, won the 4-mile chase down at Mark's Tay, and brought him home a fortune. He said he'd heard about a horse for sale, where no fee's been paid, as the trainer wail. So I'll let him go most reasonable. Will you come down and see him? When we got to this trainer's yard, Uncle stopped in his tracks right hard, for as in his dream, upon my word, stood a lop-eared dappled grey horse. The bargain in it then begun. They asked 500, we said 1. Let's toss to get the difference done. So Uncle crossed his fingers. A score a coin went in the air. It's heads for you and tails my share. When we counted out, Uncle won his dare and had bought hisself a racehorse. We took him home and got him fit, a double handful on the bit. When you rode him out, didn't need a whip, and he could stay forever. To see him leap, it was right grand. He'd clear a 5-bar gate from stand. Uncle, he did wring his hands in quiet anticipation. The best thing was no one knew of him. In the point-to-point he was entered in. Our secret was, but could he win? We reckoned he'd surprise 'em. And when the day of the race came round, Uncle counted out £700 for another dream in his sleep he'd found. He had been drawn lucky 7. And when we got down to the course, 'twas the 7th race, number 7 horse, price 7 to 1, so early doors. We laid down all our money, waited with a bated breath. In 7th heaven you can guess, knowing our luck was in, and yes, the damn thing come in 7th. Let the moral of this story be, dreams they do come true, you see. Consider your luck most carefully, or you'll get dissatisfaction.
Well, Ruby's on the heath at Newmarket, and she's out there one morning, and she meets an old friend, Sir Alfred Munnings, as he was then, and she used to tell us about him. He used to call her Rosie when she used to hunt with the Essex and Suffolk, because he came from Dedham, and she had little stories about him that she told us, like one morning he said to her when they were out hunting, he said, go and tell the master so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and Ruby rode up to the master and says, sir, Mr. Munnings says so-and-so. Mr. Munnings, he said, go and tell Mr. Munnings to pay his hunt subscription fee. And there he was president then when she met him he was then Sir Alfred and president of the Royal Academy. But anyhow, and she says, where are you living now? And she said, well, just round the corner. He said, is that Frank Wellsman's old house? And she said, yes, it was. And that was a friend of his, and he comes round there, and she gives him some Dundee marmalade jars to put his paint brushes in and things like that. And about this time, there's another fellow comes in to give us some hand with some decorating and painting the house and that like. And his name is Johnny Grimes. And Johnny Grimes had been warned off. He was the first man to be warned off the turf for doping. And what he'd done, he'd put some whiskey in the mash. But anyhow, he was never allowed to tread on the hallowed turfs again. And he used to make a living by doing a bit of decorating and buying the odd horse or ranging for something like that, but he hadn't got any money. And he came in one day, and he used to go up regular to the sales, the Tattersall sales, and have a look up there and see if he could tell someone about something and earn a few quid. And he came back and said, there's a little foal up there that was lame. And he reckoned it had only been injured in the box. So Ruby said, well, let's go and have a look at it. And off they go in her 1938 Morris 8 up there and see this foal. And she agreed that she thought that was all right. And when that came into the ring, I mean, it's surprising with these sales. Everybody's interested in the best lots and that like. But at the bottom end, sometimes things go cheap. And she bought it for the maiden bid of 25 guineas and bring it home. And that is called Rip-a-Tip, after a song that her father used to sing. Rip-a-tip-a, turn him out and hunt him, let him go. For many a long mile they've hunted me in the woods for many long day. Poor old hoss, poor old hoss. But Rip-a-tip disappoints, and it goes into training, but it doesn't win anything for her. And she's out on the heath, I remember, one day, and the trainer came past with this horse, and Ruby said that it was lame, and he said, no, that's not Mrs. Lame. That's not lame, Mrs. Lanham. And he goes a bit further and he comes back, and he said, you are right, Mrs. Lanham, the horse is lame. And I can remember another instance when we went to Huntingdon races, and we're by the last jump, and a horse came down, and Ruby said that horse has broken its leg. It mustn't get up. And this crowd soon gathered there, and this horse is struggling to get up, and you don't want a horse to get up with a broken leg because the bone comes to the side or something like that. And she shouts out to the jockey, sit on that horse's head, as loud as she could. And because if a horse is down, the only way you can stop it getting up is to sit on its head. And he goes and does what she told him to do, which is sit on the horse's head. But anyhow, her dream is, they have Rip-a-tip covered because her dream is to win a race up at Newmarket. And they have a foal called Obadiah, which they think is promising. But anyhow, about this time, there's a young jockey who's come to ride in Newmarket at the top of Moulton Road. And one particular morning, he comes down to have his breakfast. He's going back to have his breakfast at his old uncle's, Freddie Lane. And he's got this big Cadillac. And he's got old Freddie Lane in there. And Freddie Lane was a much respected Newmarket character. He'd been a good jockey in his time. He won the Derby, Freddie Lane. And Freddie Lane is white in this damn Cadillac, and he comes straight the way down Moulton Road, straight out into Old Station Road without stopping at the main junction. He's heading right up to the clock tower that was then a roundabout, and because nothing was coming, to shake old Freddie Lane up further, he goes round the wrong way, round the roundabout. And I reckon that by the time Freddie Lane got home, he didn't fancy his breakfast. But anyhow, this jockey, he had a wicked sense of humour, he had a speech impediment, he had a hearing deficiency, he was as mean as Moses Maggot. He never gave the lads anything. They usually give the lads in the yard a drink, but he never ever did. And they said he never read the newspapers, but he would read the yellow one, because the yellow one is the racing calendar. And the racing calendar, then, it's white now, but they used to be yellow. And you look in the racing calendar, it has all the runners coming up, and he'd want to know what they were, because he wanted the best rides. And he read the pink one, because that was what to do with your money, the Financial Times. So the story was he never read the white newspapers, because he wouldn't read the rubbish that they said about him. So he never said we wouldn't read the white newspapers, just the pink and the yellow one. And he had great success in his life. Then he came a cropper, but he had the heart to come again. Andrew will just tell you about him.
The racing calendar is yellow, the Financial Times is white, pink. I'll start that again. The racing calendar is yellow, the Financial Times is pink. White newspapers tell stories and many times they sting. The racing calendar is all you need for a living from the turf. The Financial Times will tell you just what that living's worth. So come all you young apprentices and listen unto me. I'll tell you of a jockey who started out like thee. Won many hundred races and trophies of gold. And when knocked down he came again, to ride he did and bold. For 9 derbies hath he won, Newmarket's favourite son, who never read a white newspaper, just the pink and the yellow one. So as you tack up your horses to ride out on the heath, do you know what you're sitting on, what lies your saddle beneath? For at 18 years he took a ride at 33 to 1, and when Never Say Die went past the post, his first derby he had won. For 9 derbies hath he won, Newmarket's favourite son, who never read a white newspaper, just the pink and the yellow one. And if winners you should ride, a warning take by me, never fool the taxman if you value what is free. For this jockey was arrested, in court he did stand trial, and with the mighty humbled how white newspapers did smile. The judge he looked at him as he stood there in the dock, and the sentence that he gave that day caused a mighty shock, saying you are a famous person, so an example I am making. I'm giving you 3 years in jail for your under declaration. For 9 derbies hath he won, Newmarket's favourite son, who never read a white newspaper, just the pink and the yellow one. Whilst in his prime the Queen did say, please come around for tea. You are the finest jockey, so here's an OBE. But as he lay in High Point jail, a letter it did come, saying you don't deserve your OBE, so hand it back, old son. He quickly read this letter, and then he did decide to wrap it in brown paper with a note that said inside, I won this for being a jockey, and no other deed I've done. You can take away an OBE, but not the derbies I have won. For 9 derbies hath he won, Newmarket's favourite son, who never read a white newspaper, just the pink and the yellow one. So jockey lads, take caution what white newspapers say. They'll build you into a hero to knock you down next day. And if knowledge you should gain, then it never is too late to go down to a racing tavern where the old men congregate. And whether in the jockey's calf, or piling a muck hill, or riding a gallop up the side of Warren Hill, take hitherto this lesson, and the praises that I sing of the man who lives topside a town, who of racing was the king. For 9 derbies hath he won, Newmarket's favourite son, who never read a white newspaper, just the pink and the yellow one.
Well, I expect you know who that's about. He doesn't want too much describing. Well, Rippertip disappoints, but Obadiah, they have great prospects for Obadiah, and he wins at Nottingham, and he's going to run in the Cambridgeshire, and they think he stands a good chance, but unfortunately he breaks down. But before that, he runs in the a race at Newmarket, which he wins for Ruby, and there she is, leading him into the winner's enclosure. There's a story that my mother told, so I know it to be true. It's of a horse kind, brave and bold. We have told the tale to you. Thank you very much.
Right, before you all rush off, thanks very much for coming. Hope you've enjoyed this evening. We'll have some other events like this throughout the year, I'm sure. But let's hear it again for Andrew and Neil.
Thank you very much indeed. You've been a very good audience. I'd like to say, if anybody's interested, I spend my time now going around recording anybody, what George Ewart Evans called the prior culture. Anybody who's got a story about horsemen and things like that. Also in the 60s, I used to go around recording people singing in pubs. If anybody wants to hear us, we're usually at Andrews, the last Saturday in the month, Cavern Winkle. And we're going to have a special night down there because the old Suffolk horseman had a suit like Andrew's got on, which was a pride and joy, only found here in Suffolk, and it was bespoke made by the Suffolk horsemen because the Suffolk horsemen were important people in their own culture. They're more important than the farmers, and they had their own identity. And we're hoping there'll be several old boys like Sam Friend. Sam Friend you could hear singing on there. And he was a real old Suffolk horseman, had this suit with the Van Dyke horseshoe buttons, and Van Dyke, they had 3 suits. In fact, we hope that suit will be down there. So if anybody wants to come along, and we usually, Andrew and I usually give a horseman's jacket as a prize for the Suffolk horse ploughing match, and we're going to try and raise some money down there on March the 10th, if anybody wants to come down. Be good to see you. Thank you very much indeed.